Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Neil, and it's great to be here. I should also declare a very privileged interest here, and that is I'm also a non-exec director of SGN, so it's great to be part of the sponsorship team. I've been involved in energy for about sort of 30 years, but mainly before I was in Parliament, mainly in the oil and gas sector. And so coming into the power sector, it was really interesting to see where we are in terms of other parts of the energy sector, but also in terms of other sectors. And both myself and the Energy Systems Catapult have been proposing to government over the last 3 to 4 years is that the energy sector is super fantastic, but we're quite far behind when it comes to data digitalisation, data analytics, and the skills that are needed. But that this was actually a moment of opportunity for us to start to put a strategy in place where we can actually start to leapfrog. And so we've been commissioned, or were commissioned, by BEIS, Ofgem and Innovate UK to develop a strategy for a modern digitalised energy system. Now, this is my little sort of outline of where we sit, and particularly for policymakers. The past, we've got a kilowatt hour, we've got the price cap, which is really actually addressing a legacy problem. This whole issue about, you know, big is beautiful. And we're moving into a very, very different world, as Neil rightly says. Super distributed, very consumer focused. The energy sector has 6 consumer profiles. Amazon runs across the UK 150,000 different archetypes. We're going to have a whole area around mobility, blended products, issues around smart cities and smart solutions, where in some ways the definition of who we are, let's say in the gas sector or the electricity sector or the mobility sector, starts to become very blurred. I also think that there is something really important about location, and I think that location is going to become a much bigger issue around how do we create systems, solutions, and how the different appropriatenesses. I'm afraid I've got to always have something from Monty Python, and blessed are the cheesemakers. We are moving from a very big and centralised system to many ways a bottom up. And what can allow this new system the benefits, the decarbonisation and decentralisation dividend to be truly realised? And I would propose that there are many aspects that will unlock that dividend and actually reduce the costs as perceived today about decarbonisation. But one of the big issues here is data. And whether that be the data that is coming through, and I know Maxine will be talking a lot more about the consumer and smart meter data, sort of in some ways challenges that we've got to address, but whether that be from a consumer perspective, whether that be from new operators, local authorities doing blended products across system, whether that be from mobility. And I have a fridge here, and I know this sounds weird, but a fridge, actually, when the introduction of fridges in the food sector, it actually revolutionised the way the food system worked. When we start to look at storage and how we're going to be delivering and developing, whether that be heat storage or electricity storage, whether that be in-house or at a sort of local stroke regional level, this is going to change how the system works. And in many ways, we are still in very much an analog world where we see supply coming down and the consumer being, in some ways, the victim of the system that we've created. This is going to be very much more a two-way communication and a two-way system design. So why is digitalisation and why is data going to be important for the system? So currently, we've got very little infrastructure visibility. I think people know where Hinckley is because there's something in the name. However, when we start to look at actually all the systems that we're putting in place, all the distributed systems, and even how, and I don't know whether there's anybody from BEIS here, but even how we procure the capacity market, we're putting in assets without understanding exactly the impacts that those assets will have on the wider system, on constraints, on potential new technologies. So we've got to get infrastructure visibility. How are we going to enable smart? We can't impose a smart system onto a dumb system. We have got to start to, in some ways, meet the challenges of smart. And that flexibility, as Neil rightly says, is absolutely fundamental to, again, driving down prices, delivering the decarbonisation dividend, which I think is absolutely there to be grabbed. Multi-actor system management. I know many of you here, you're working with DNOs, you're working with other providers. This is going to require some form of communication. You're going to have to system design collectively, not in the silos that we've had previously. And also, one of my great beefs is I'm not sure that we've got very good price discovery in the sector. And through data, through optimization, and through, in many ways, multi-data communications, we're going to get much better when it comes to price discovery, which I think is pretty opaque. So I think there are lots of opportunities here. Very pleased to have somebody from Ofgem here. Actually, data will deliver a much, much stronger regulatory oversight too, because currently there is a big asymmetry between the regulation and the sector itself. As I say, the remit of our report was not covering data that's covered by GDPR. We come right up to the meter, but also believe that while consumer data is extremely important, we can get a long way and do a lot of heavy lifting on behalf of the consumer to deliver a better system. So our first point was really the vision for this modern digitalised energy system. There is data. There is data in the sector. There's quite a lot of data. I have to say, guys, girls, quality is a little bit of a problem in our sector. We're quite far behind the rest of the world in terms of data. But we do have data. Let's understand what we've got. Then let's look at the infrastructure and asset visibility. Then you layer on operational optimization, and that then starts to deliver open markets. So this was the vision that drove us to the conclusions that we reported on a couple of weeks ago. So how? Well, we've got gaps. We've got quite a lot of gaps. Asset managers don't actually always know where their assets are, which is an interesting concept. We have got a lot of quality gaps. I think we've got a lot of quality gaps. And we've also got skills gaps. And I think it's really important. I was with a very, very large company who introduced me to their director of data strategy. And this person said to me, so I said, what's your data strategy? And they said, well, fantastic. Our data strategy is really, really innovative. We have got 87% of our customer postcodes. I thought, fantastic. You know, normally it's quite nice to have 100%, but maybe I'm being too fussy here. However, what was fascinating about it was that they didn't really understand what I meant by a data strategy. I was not asking about customer information. So we've got a long way to go, and we need to get out a lot more and meet some people who are really at the forefront of the data sector, recruit them, bring them involved, and actually start to understand systems orientation. So in a reasonably regulated world, we have a digitalisation principle. And that means we do need new data, and that will hopefully be integrated into quite a lot of the regulatory frameworks that are coming forward. We mustn't also expect the sector to be beautiful at this moment, because it isn't. And so we've recommended very much that both Ofgem and BEIS look at continual improvement, not perfection, but continual improvement with a ratchet to ensure that we are upping our skills and our approaches. And that everybody has a digitalisation strategy, which means that they're actually integrating that into their business planning. The second pillar really is about maximising that value. Fabulous that we got all this new data, fabulous that we're, really upping our skills. But if nobody can see it, if it's sitting in silos, if it's totally unable to interoperate, how are we going to create system design? So our controversial recommendation is that energy system data should be presumed open. Now, this is a very big word, presumed open. All those security guys go very sort of hyperventilate a lot. However, we can actually presume openness and triage for security, for privacy, for consumer detriment and commerciality back towards closed. But you have to start with open, and then you have to justify why you want to close your data. And this, in a highly regulated sector, can be absolutely done, and we can contest whether one, let's say, network operator is doing something different from another. This then starts to create visibility. So discoverable, searchable, and understandable. Again, as I say, we've got to be talking some form of common languages that actually we can start to understand and see. Structures and standards in terms of the data, that is something that both the sector, the regulator, and other sectors, and it's great to have someone here who knows a lot about the digital twin concept, where we're actually relating and we're pushing into the national infrastructure planning around a national digital twin of all infrastructure. And secure and resilient. Now, if anybody wants to know secure and resilience of its best, the best in class, do spend some time in Estonia. One of the most exciting revelations through this process is how we actually ensure that we have a very, very open system, but it is secure from any neighbours that you might have in your region that would want to try and compromise your system. And I'll come on to our building blocks. So these are the principles, and we're integrating them with Ofgem, with BEIS, and with other partners. But what is extraordinary about the process that we went through with this project is actually we are starting to get the sector really pushing even further. And there's a huge amount of enthusiasm, not for what we've done it because we've co-created it with the sector, but actually the realization that this is a very, very important building block. It is an enabler of so much more. This was a presumed open triage process, which is part of our report. And we have been proposing to Ofgem and BEIS that we need 3 core building blocks. We think that the private sector will deliver lots of new market opportunities, will in many ways bring the system to life, but that there are 3 key things that we need to put in place to in many ways facilitate the sector to move forward. Firstly is this issue around data visibility. And we're proposing that there is a data catalogue. This is not a data library. This is just a registration of the data you hold according to common metadata standards. And this actually allows us, and it allows innovators, it allows regulators, but also each other to see the data that we hold, what quality it is in, do a little bit of competition and comparison, but to ensure that we've got an understanding of what's there and where the gaps lie. New asset visibility. Currently, I don't know whether anybody in this room is running an asset registration platform. I understand that there are 114 asset registration platforms across the energy sector. Now, we've been able to identify 23. All of these, and I think I've got, this is what it could look like at this moment. So what we have got is we've got all these different asset registration. You put in your information. If you were a consumer and you had a PV, an EV, and an internal battery, you would have to input your data 6 times with 6 different silos, with no coordination, no understanding, and no shared data whatsoever. This is crazy. And also what it means is nobody will register, let's be frank. There is also another issue here, which I know is not so much to do with gas, but certainly to do with electricity. I am not sure that very many people in the energy sector realise that if you have any form of battery in your home or in your office or with your factory, you have to register with the fire brigade. And if you don't, firemen get electrocuted. So I think that we've got a lot of cleaning up around this system, which actually requires a strategy to ensure that we are looking at data asset visibility much more effectively. And this is our sort of model, but we're leaving this open for the sector to develop. But it must actually be resolved quite quickly, because more and more asset registration platforms are emerging every 5 minutes. And then something that is very much driven by the National Infrastructure Commission and the digital twin is we're looking and proposing that we end up with a digital system map, and that delivers visibility and operational capabilities and is the start of a journey towards a digital twin. Australia did this, and again it's quite interesting because the security guys get really nervous. Oh, we can't show where things are, but actually Australia instigated a whole energy system map, and the reason for it was because of lack of resilience, that actually visibility allows for a much greater response, a much more effective response in terms of assets. So this, these are our 5 recommendations, and we believe very much that actually this isn't just about regulation or about BEIS driving this forward, although their leadership is incredibly important. It is about culture change, and it is about how we as the sector desire to leapfrog other sectors, that we desire and need to invest in the right skills, the right attitude, and in many ways a very different approach to systems. And the systems are blurring and becoming much, much more integrated. And I think, personally, this is a super exciting time for energy. But I do think that we need to step up to that challenge and ensure that we've got the right skills around the table, the right skills across the sector, right skills with the regulator, and ensure that we own our future rather than find other companies coming in and digitalising on our behalf and finding the world looks like Alexa. Thank you very much indeed.
There's some microphones around the table. I'll just check Slido to see if anybody has used Slido, but if not, if you put your hand up, which to say who you are, organisation, and then the question for Laura.
Are we on? Hi. Need new data. Why do you need new data?
Well, firstly, I think that you need to. Firstly, I think we've got a major problem with quality of data, and it's all very inconsistent. We've got some, let's say in the network sector, we've got some networks who've got very, very detailed visibility of their assets, and that is bringing on new markets. It's bringing on new flexibility. They're therefore able to auction in some ways constraint mitigation. Then there are others who've got virtually no data at all about their networks. And I think that I think it's absolutely essential that if you're running an asset, that you actually understand it. And if your asset is also in some ways an enabler of other people's assets, it's incumbent on you to be able to explain what that asset looks like. However, without much more data and a more digitalised mentality across the sector, we're not going to be able to optimise assets and in many ways look at their time, function and service that they can deliver to the system at that moment. It's going to become a much more fluid, dynamic system, and without data flows, I think it's impossible. Currently, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Ofgem receive certain information about networks that have actually got pencil drawings about where systems are, right? I'm not sure that PDFs with a bit of drawing and, can I add this in, is really the world of tomorrow?
But you're talking, we have data.
Yes, you have lots of, yes.
But And data modelling also exists, because they model demand already. Some networks do a good job of this.
Yes.
So do they need to do more? Why would they need to do more? For those who haven't got that, yes, more. But for those who have the bare minimum of data, why do more?
Right. I mean, I would say that definitely there are some best in class, but there are some real gaps. I think that there is also a real issue around quality. But I also think that as, let's say, and actually to be frank, and great respect to the gas sector is probably, in many ways, has been much more focused on data and data flows on the basis of actually safety, which actually is a much greater imperative. If you start to look at the electricity networks, the divergence is absolutely huge. But once you start to get into multi-vector system management, you're going to have to communicate with DNOs in a totally different way. And in many ways, I actually think operational data is going to be the really important bit, but you do need the infrastructure data to start the process off. There's a big project going on with the Geospatial Commission, which is about underground assets. And they're looking at that from an optimization point of view in terms of drilling holes in other people's infrastructure. I also think that there's a very interesting proposition around shared infrastructure, where we've got opportunity to take broadband through different networks, etc. And in many ways, maybe some of the actual assets will become less siloed in terms of what they deliver.
Thank you for that. And the question at the back.
Hi, Natasha Batchelor from National Grid. You mentioned that data presumed open and system maps make security people nervous. So how can we ensure the integrity of our security systems, and how can you convince people this is the right direction to go?
Well, all the work that we've done has gone through critical national infrastructure people. So everyone's happy with how we're approaching it from a security, just to make everyone feel totally relaxed, okay? But there is, and I think that there's always been a debate about this, about whether visibility actually gives you more security or whether hidden gives you more security. Now, I think a lot of that has changed over the years. So, for example, when you start to look at critical infrastructure, all you need to do is to go on Google and you can find exactly what's what. There's something very interesting about substations, right? So if you go to a substation and it's got a little padlock on it, right, you know that that's probably not one of the most critical ones. If you go to a substation and there's massive, sort of barbed wire and all the rest of it, it's telling you something, okay? So in terms of, we're already creating a lot of messaging about our infrastructure, right? Now, I think that cybersecurity, I used to work in the Caucasus, so I sort of understand a little bit the shadow of a nerve-wracking neighbour. I think that we need very, very much more macro, economy-wide mitigation against these sorts of interventions, if they are to happen, and they do happen on a regular basis. And what we need is different sorts of responses, and that is cut-off points where you sort of intervention on one part of a system has a cut-off point that it doesn't impact the overall system. I think we actually have to rethink, but I don't think visibility is the security problem. I think there's a much, much deeper problem around this.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay. Got one in via Slido, so thank you for starting that process. How do you ensure networks provide high-quality data?
Well, I think the point is that it's going to be very much in the eye of the user, because your data needs, first of all, I think there's a competitive aspect here. So if you look at I mean, I think once we get data visibility through the data catalogue, you're going to be able to see the comparison between a good set of network data and a much poorer one, and I think that gives an opportunity to contest, and it's an opportunity to improve and create a new business as usual, right? So I think that we'll definitely improve it that way. I think that actually once you start to move into sort of cross-vector systems, everyone is going to have to improve their data to be actually functioning and to be part of the system. So I think it will be continual improvement, but I think that we need to create, and maybe this is an Ofgem-driven operation, that business as usual has to improve on a year-by-year basis, that we can't be complacent. But I do actually think there will be market opportunities missed if companies don't understand that their data needs to improve and their skills need to improve.